Kristian, welcome back for the second time. It's fantastic to finally meet you in person and have you in the studio. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So before scheduling this podcast, you said you had some travel commitments, some conferences to go to. How can you sort of summarize the latest conferences? What are sort of the questions? It's been Pareto conference, you've been in London. What is the sentiment? What are people curious about on a high level?
So yeah, like you said, we've typically after the earnings release, you start focusing on investor meetings and like you said, the Pareto conference, which is a great meeting place for investors and companies in the maritime and energy space. We focus a lot on that conference, and then this week we went to London to meet some investors there and participate in Capital Link. And I think the main focus there is to, among the investors, is what's happening in the market, because the market has been very volatile this year. We've been down to, we came in at $30,000 a day. We fell down to $10,000 a day per day after the Chinese introduced their retaliatory tariffs after Liberation Day. And then the market started climbing again, and today we are at $75,000 per day in the spot market, which is a very solid rate environment. And obviously the investors would like to understand what is the reasoning behind this volatility, what can we expect for the coming 12 months, 18 months, what's the fundamentals looking like. And I think so we spend a lot of time on talking about the market and what is actually driving the market at the moment. So, and of course this year has been very much formed and shaped by geopolitics. I mentioned the retaliatory tariffs that the Chinese introduced on US source LPG and all the commodities as well after Liberation Day, which hit our market instantly, and the rates reacted and fell off the cliff within just a couple of days, from $40,000 per day to $10,000 per day before the market rebalanced and the activity picked up again. So I think and one important part of this, which we try to explain to the investors, is that LPG is a byproduct of the crude oil and natural gas production in the US, the Middle East, and also other parts of the world. And everything which is not consumed domestically has to be exported to the international market because it is this byproduct. So you have this very efficient price to clear mechanism for all the excess production of the product, so it can hit the international market. And you have another thing which is quite I would say fortunate from a shipping perspective, which is that you have this great dislocation of production of LPG in the US and the big consumer markets in Asia, which creates this very shipping intensive commodity trade which has fueled the VLGC market for many years now. So we talk a lot about these fundamentals so that the investors can understand what is actually driving the market, and that we, from our point of view, believe it's a very solid market also going forward based on the fundamentals that we see in the market.
Great summary. So if you had to answer a question, what's the correlation between geopolitics and the LPG market? It's like you said, maybe it's also multi-layered, first order consequence, second order consequence, because like you said, it sort of has to go into the market regardless. So maybe that's also the fascinating part with, geopolitics and LPG, that is not, it's, I don't know, if you spend a lot of time thinking, okay, if this is initiated from a government perspective, how certain are you of the consequences given the summary you gave just now? You always just, it's hard to truly know, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think shipping has always been exposed to geopolitics, and I mean, regardless of, it hits the various shipping segments in a different way. For instance, the the Russian-Ukraine war has impacted the tanker market, a lot, while our market has been less affected because it's not really impacting the commodity trade as such. While the trade between the US and Asia is a major driver for our markets, and obviously what's happening then between China being the biggest importer of US LPG and the US, that game is obviously impacting us a lot. So, but it was very interesting to see the resilience in the LPG market. So when the Chinese importers basically stepped back from the market, there were other players in the market in Asia which took up that void space, and that was the Indian importers, Japanese, Koreans, and also actually Middle East producers who saw that opportunity to capitalize on the situation.
For people who are totally new to this sector, how can we introduce LPG just in general? Because it's such a fascinating, product. It goes into essential things like heating, cooking, plastic production. Is there a simple way to just introducing the market?
Yeah, sure. And like you say, it's a very versatile commodity. Like mentioned, it's a byproduct from the crude oil and natural gas production, it's easy to handle. If you think about your own barbecue, you have that canister or cylinder, which is easy to carry around, and you can, compared to natural gas, for instance, you can very easily capture new markets simply because you don't need a lot of infrastructure investments to distribute the LPG. So it's easy to handle, competitively priced. Like I said, it has to be exported to the international market since it is this byproduct, which the producers need to get rid of at one point. Has a high calorific value. It's relatively clean. It burns cleaner than kerosene and biomass and wood and so on, which is why a lot of the major market for LPG is the residential sector in, let's say, less developed part of the world, like the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and so on. There are big government programs to support and subsidize the use of LPG because it's a cleaner burning fuel than many of the alternatives. And then you have that other big market which you mentioned, which is it's a feedstock for the petrochemical industry, especially in Northeast Asia. That market has grown tremendously over the last 6, 7, 8 years, predominantly in China. We also have other markets like auto gas. We also use it as a marine fuel. And for us in the LPG shipping space, it's a great alternative for burning compliant fuel. We reduce our CO2 emissions. It's cheaper actually per metric ton than burning compliant fuel as well because of the high calorific value of the LPG. So it has a lot of appliances, which makes it quite a unique commodity to compared to many other commodities.
Is there a reason why Africa isn't a very important destination for LPG, or is that sort of coming, or will they leapfrog to something else or not taking it?
Yeah, so West Africa has since the last 20 years been an exporting region for LPG, but they're actually quite a big market for VLGCs from 2006-07 up to 5 years ago, I would say. But due to the rapidly growing population in West Africa, the exports have been more or less choked, and they use the LPG themselves in that part of the world. What we do see now, though, which is very interesting, is that we see more cargoes going into East Africa. So that is a new market that we anticipate will develop over the next decade. Especially for residential use, heating and cooking. And that is, again, a very similar story, we think, as like we have seen in India recently, where you have government programs subsidizing and supporting the use of LPG as alternative to wood, biomass, and charcoal burning indoor, especially.
But to truly understand why this has been a fantastic segment recently, is the simple answer just going to be the US production? And that is like the main driver that maybe took some people by surprise. If you also maybe add on the Panama Canal a couple of years ago, that people didn't really see that, increase of production.
Yeah, I think the US production has been surprising on the upside for many years. So that's absolutely right. So you can, and we can see even now that the crude oil wells, especially in the Permian Basin, which is this massive basin of which the Americans they drill crude oil, as the wells mature, they become more gaseous. So there is a much higher content of LPG as well as ethane in these crude oil wells than we thought some years ago. And also the technological advancement has made it possible to actually explore more of the oil and gas in this region. So that has been a fantastic journey for the industry, definitely. And if you look at the projections going forward 5-7 years ahead, all the big players locally, and these are multi-billion-dollar companies, right? They foresee steady growth in the production of LPG from these wells, even though the crude oil production is plateauing. And that's simply because there is so much gas in these wells, which will eventually come up to the surface, and the American consumption is stable. So basically all the incremental volumes will be made available for exports at one point. And then on top of that, you have a natural gas development in the US. These wells are slightly drier than the crude oil wells, but because of the volume, the share volume, it has a significant also impact on the LPG volumes, which will be made available for exports in the future. So the US is definitely going to play a vital part, continue to play a vital part for our market going forward. And then the Middle East, where we have seen more stable exports over the last years, they are also growing their LPG exports on the back of all the Qatari LNG trains, which are coming on stream soon. And also from countries like Abu Dhabi. And then further out in line, we also see other projects in Saudi Arabia now coming up, which will increase the export volumes from the Middle East. So on the production side, we see there is an abundance of LPG, which will be made available for the international market in the next 5-year, 7-year period. I mean, there is no doubt about that. And then coming back to another very important point is that it is Asia which is the main receiver of this. And it will be so in the future as well. And maybe also East Africa, like we talked about, will be developed as this new market for the residential use of LPG. And this creates this very shipping intensive trade, which I talked about earlier. And since India, just a very interesting observation is that since India is absorbing today about 50% of the exports from the Middle East, the countries further east in Asia are actually even more dependent on the US volumes to meet their demand than they were before. So we see, for instance, countries like Indonesia sourcing more than 1/3 of their LPG volumes now all the way from the US. So that dynamic that's kind of the fundamentals. And on top of that, that's something we also talk a lot about with our investors these days. You have this, you mentioned the Panama Canal, which introduces a lot of inefficiency in the VLGC fleet, and that inefficiencies in shipping absorbs capacity. And when there is a lot of inefficiency in shipping, the rates typically react because there are essentially fewer ships available for the next cargo. And we have some very, the Panama Canal is the strongest, let's say, driver of these inefficiencies in our market, because VLGCs are not prioritized through the canal. Containers are prioritized, LNG carriers. Now we also see ethane carriers coming in, willing to pay up more in these daily auctions. And then the alternative is that more VLGCs will have to sail around South Africa on the way to and from the US and Asia, which is a much longer sailing distance, absorbing a lot of capacity from the fleet. So the inefficiencies that we are faced with in this market play a very important role in the rate setting environment that we see today, for instance.
So the only nightmare you can have as an investor is too many orders of new ships?
I think, that, we get that question, what keeps you awake at night? And at the moment, of course, geopolitics is very unpredictable. So it's always something which can quickly change the market and the circumstances, right? But I think if you look at the pure fundamentals, like we talked about, supply, demand, and also these inefficiencies which are absorbing a lot of capacity from the fleet. The thing we focus more on at the moment is how to position the company for what may happen in 27, 28, because there is, like you say, quite, let's say it's a sizable order book which has to be phased in. And we're not, we tell all our investors we're not naive about this. We have refinanced our bank debt recently to make sure that we have a robust balance sheet in preparation for what may lie ahead of us. We are taking some more coverage on time charters, which is one way to build up a buffer if the market is weakening.
How do you calculate that? Is that just like an art, or is it just the Excel sheets give you the answer and based on?
It's a mix, but it's a bit of you look at, okay, what kind of higher levels can we obtain in the market? And we have been able to secure quite a few time charters now, 3 to 5 year duration, where we at higher levels in the low $40,000 up to high $40,000 per day. And when we have a cash break even, of 24,800, which is expected to fall down towards $20,000 per day as we reach 2027, because then all the dry dockings will be done, so the cash break even is coming off. We regard rates in paying low $40,000 to high $40,000 per day as a very nice hedge. And then we have been quite openly talking to the investors that currently, after we acquired the Avance fleet, we had a coverage of about 30% of our fleet capacity on time charters, and we will work to increase that up towards 40%, provided that we are able to obtain what we believe is attractive rate levels. And this is a pure hedging strategy. But we want to have exposure to the market as well, because what happened in 2023, when we also had a big order book being phased into the market, it turned out to be the best year ever for VLGCs, because you had a combination of high export volumes from the US, high growth, and the Panama Canal, which due to drought was basically closed for VLGCs for a prolonged period of time that year. And then with more ships sailing around South Africa, absorbing a lot of capacity, the rates, shot through the roof, and it was the best year ever for VLGCs. And I think for us and our investors, we want to have exposure to that spot market, because I think there is no other market except for the big tankers where you have that, phenomenal upside potential in the market. Mm. And we want to have exposure to that market. So it's a little bit like protect your downside and let the market the upside will take care of itself through the market kind of thinking.
Great answer. So you mentioned, absorbing the Avance fleet, and just to take you a couple of years back, because I think maybe this story sort of exemplifies, you know, the unique part of the shipping industry. Because when you led Avance Gas and then you decided to leave, and then fast forward a couple of years, you end up buying the fleet to your company. Do you feel like that story just like exemplifies shipping, that you meet again, but you don't know when or in what context? Or did you see that, or did you see it happening? You know?
No, there wasn't kind of a big master plan behind this. So it's like you say, it's you know, string of coincidence, which and timing, obviously, which is which was quite unique in a way. But of course, it's in hindsight, it's a fun story. But it is because of coincidence and opportunities which you suddenly are presented with. So there wasn't kind of a big plan behind that or in any way. But it should be said that there had been talks, you know, you know, my predecessor, Andreas Sohmen-Pao, had also, you know, loosely discussed this, let's say, opportunity with Avance back in the day. So it wasn't kind of entirely new concept before I came in. So it was, but suddenly the stars were aligned, and that's when it's important to move quickly and make sure that you can, you know, capture that opportunity and actually strike a deal when the window of opportunity is there.
How easy is it to structure a deal that is quite big in size, money terms? Is it a fairly simple process, or is it, you know, quite intense to actually get it over the line in the speed you want to and execute it?
I think you know, you have basically two ways of acquiring a fleet like that. You can either acquire the company or you can acquire the assets. And when we started, Øystein Kalleklev and I started looking at this, I think it took like one day, and we realized, okay, that to go down that avenue where you acquire the company is a very tedious process with a lot of traps, and you have legislation in Bermuda and Singapore, Oslo. And then we quickly realized that because we needed to act with speed, and to do that, it's much easier to focus on the assets. And in shipping, it's a very standardized, you know, process buying a ship, and it's not really anything different if you buy one ship or 6 or 7 or 12 ships. It's the same standard contracts, the same process you go through, the sequence of payments and so on, and that obviously simplified it to the extent that we could move very fast as soon as we had agreed on the price. And there was one thing which is also very important when you want to move quickly, and that is the importance of trust. And obviously, since I knew Øystein very well, I knew the ships. I mean, I also, when I was a shipbroker, you know, I knew the ships from the actually I was at the name-giving ceremony even back in the 2014-15, whenever it was, and so you have that element of trust which allows you to move very quickly if necessary. And then in the BW system, we also have, you know, great support from the major shareholder, Andreas Sohmen-Pao, who has a lot of trading, transaction experience, and also the financial muscle to actually move, which allows you to move quickly when necessary. So, for instance, he came up with the proposal of a bridging loan because the other alternative is to go to the banks and you have to go through all these credit committees and await the debt on the vessels. But with the bridging loan from BW Group, you just eliminated that hurdle. I could move very fast on the back of that. So of course we have a very supportive major shareholder who allows us to move with speed, and we also have the capacity in the BW system because it's a system where you can mobilize a lot of hands on deck if needed. And that's what you typically need to make such a transaction successful, because there are lots of elements of such a transaction which you need to be aware of and think about. So this is a team effort, and I think the BW system has an amazing ability to mobilize the right resources at the right point in time.
Yeah. No, great answer. And I was actually about to ask you about the system in general, because when you enter the system, or if any person entered that specific system, what makes it sort of unique and make it tick? Is it the sort of the things you mentioned now, like the capability to do big transactions, all the people you can sort of get involved quite quickly, and also the big shareholders actually pushing deals forward? Or are there any parts also that makes it a bit unique, and either long-term thinking or some different approaches to the market?
No, I think, Andreas Sohmen-Pao has been amazing in the way that and I can say this because I come from the outside and can compare with other systems as well.
Exactly.
In the way of, because he acquired, a series of companies, and the way I see it, he was able to maintain part of that legacy in these companies, while building on that also for the future. So you have that fantastic mix in the company culture of history, as well as a drive to always stay relevant and to grow the company at the right time, and to make sure that you have a robust balance sheet, and you are thinking about managing risk, and I think there are lots of these, many of these elements are what creates and makes the BW system very, very special, I would say. And obviously, Andreas has a strong interest in the company. He's a hardworking chairman, very interested and supportive in the work that we're doing as a management team and also as an organization. And he involves himself in the organization as well, and that obviously colors the way of thinking over time, and has created this fantastic organization with a mix of strong legacy, but the ability to continue to grow and stay relevant in the future. I think it's 19 companies now in total in that kind of BW sphere, and half of them approximately are outside of the maritime, let's say strictly maritime space now. So it's also moving over to, let's say, the future economies, in if I can call it that. So I think it's a fantastic system to work for, which cares a lot about the organization, the way we do business, and at the same time as we focus a lot on acting with speed, being shareholder friendly is the key mantra, and making sure that we invest at the right time, at the right point in the cycle, and that was something which we discussed quite intensely, I would say, in connection with the Avance transaction, because let's face it, it was at a high point in the cycle. But we could use our shares as a currency, which enabled us to actually justify that investment, even though it was at a high point in the cycle, because you can use your shares as a currency and not stretch your cash position or increase your debt, considerably.
Got it. So maybe a good bridge is to talk a bit about India, because you said the system is, of course, expanding, and one thing is, of course, having sort of an Indian company, but also going into the infrastructure space as well in LPG. Maybe we just start. Maybe the first question, India in general. I mean, the answers are somewhat obvious, but still, can you tell a bit about your experiences building in India? What makes it a unique opportunity? Any lessons learned before maybe diving into infrastructure, LPG,
sure,
as a second leg?
So before I started, the company had already expanded in India into the Indian market with building up a subsidiary, BW LPG India, also with partners, which is an entity with Indian flagged vessels. And then you are regarded as, it's run out of India, Indian flagged vessels, and it's regarded as an Indian entity which can apply for subsidies, and you have right of first refusal on certain tenders and so on. So India has had tremendous growth in the LPG demand. So on the back of that, we were very well positioned to participate in that growth. So it went from 2 ships up to 8 ships within a few years. And it's been a fantastic journey because the Indian LPG demand required more ships on the water to basically ship all the LPG from the Middle East. And this is a time charter market, which is also, like I said, fitting very well into that coverage story, time charter coverage story that the company wants to have as a hedge operating in an otherwise very volatile VLGC market. And so we've had a very nice journey on the shipping side in India. And it's been working really well and still is. And we believe in that LPG story in India because as the population is growing, the level of prosperity is growing, they need more energy, and LPG fits very well into that energy mix also in the future. And then we looked at whether we should expand our footprint also to onshore infrastructure terminals, which is not something, entirely, it's not a new idea. If you look at the industry as such, you have companies like Vitol, Petrodec, and obviously other oil majors and so on, with onshore assets which they trade around. So we teamed up with some very good partners in India, and they had a site outside Mumbai which could be very suitable geographically for imports of LPG from the Middle East. And the idea was to build a modern VLGC suitable terminal together with partners to source LPG into that very populous part of India. And then what we unfortunately realized as we moved forward was that it became slightly more expensive than we anticipated. We had also the geopolitical, events which I mentioned with the Liberation Day and the retaliatory Chinese tariffs, where when these things happen, at the management level, you start thinking, okay, now we really have to focus on the core business and what really creates value for our investors and shareholders. And this was a very small investment for us. Actually, this terminal investment was $10-15 million size investment, which required quite a lot of focus and efforts and time from the management as well as the board. So compared to the balance sheet, it was a relatively small investment, but the time we spent on it was not really something we could justify when so much happened in the market at the same time, and you start thinking about, okay, how are we going to position and kind of rig the ship for the future, right? If suddenly the market turns around. And these discussions led to a very quick turnaround for us, because we just wanted to make sure that we spent enough time and had enough focus on the shipping and the trading activities, which is the main value creators in our system, And we are, after all, a relatively small organization. And a greenfield project like we embarked on requires, a lot of attention, resources, and time from the organization, which we just had to be, very clear on. Sorry, but we are not able to follow up on that. And we had that kind of, the timing was quite, let's say, good, because we hadn't spent any money yet. So we could still make that turnaround without having spent a lot of money and time and efforts. So we could move on without having a lot of sunk costs.
But to summarize, is it like, as a shipping company, and simplifying it a bit, if you go into the infrastructure projects, like for instance, CMB Tech does in Africa, because they want the fuel, they want to see the development. So in LPG perspective, if you're involved in infrastructure, maybe it gives you a second leg to stand on. If you ensure that it's high quality, it makes it easier to, of course, fulfill it with LPG as well. So you sort of get that, you get more control on the system. But the downside is that costs can get out of hand. It's not really comparable to trading ships and doing shipping. So you sort of have to put different gloves on. And is that the dilemma, or is it other parts playing in? If you should go in the infrastructure route and or just stay shipping, and that's the only thing you're going to focus on.
I think we have also realized that, greenfield terminal projects require a lot of engineering project experience, and is, like I described, very time consuming also for the management and the board of directors. And I think our company is more, I would say, commercially savvy than engineering savvy, if you know what I'm alluding to. And I think for us, if we are going to invest in infrastructure going forward, it would be with a partner who builds the terminal, and then maybe we would like to have an investor like ourselves, where we can also utilize and add on with our commercial position on trading and shipping. So I think we would probably structure it differently, have a less involvement in the construction of a terminal, because we have realized that that's not really where our strength as an organization lies.
Interesting. Another topic that I've been thinking a bit about is, like, if you set up, like, you have a huge system, of course, the dilemma or the problem of being a pure play investment company, or diversifying and having maybe less volatility. Is there any easy answer to, if you have the system you have? Of course, the relevant example, of course, now that is being talked a lot about is, of course, CMB Tech. They want to diversify. They don't want to be a pure play. In Oslo, I feel like many of the companies that has created big shareholder returns has maybe been highly levered, pure play, get in at the right time, get out at the right time. But that doesn't give you maybe the legacy of building a 100-year-old company in the same sense as maybe if you're a bit diversified or long-term thinking. In shipping in general, is that always a thing you have to think about that makes shipping a bit unique as well? If you build another company, you can just compound. If you're a retail company or if you're an infrastructure company, you can always compound and just keep building on it. But shipping has a different kind of nature, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting discussion to have, and history will tell who's right in the end. But I think if you go back in history and you look at companies like Bergesen, for instance, here in Norway, AP Moller in Denmark, which essentially were conglomerates with tankers, dry cargo, gas, offshore, everything under one umbrella. And let's say, and you compare that business model with the pure play shipping companies that we see today, like we are also a pure play company, a shipping company, like you say, within the LPG and VLGC space. I think there is no doubt that when the times are good, you are able to return more shareholder value in a pure play company than in a more diversified company. So I think that the challenge with pure play companies is how do you play the downturn? Because the upswing allows you, since you have that very focused exposure on the market, which is returning a lot of capital, right? So the upswing is not the problem, it's how you actually manage the downturn in the market. And then I think if you look at ways to protect that downside, I believe that pure play companies are still going to be favored by the shareholders because let's say the visibility and the transparency they obtain through the dividend, and we also focus a lot, like other pure play companies, on a relatively transparent dividend policy, so that you as an investor know what kind of return you can expect when the earnings are at certain levels. So you
don't then see a big infrastructure project or using that capital, you want to return it as efficient as possible.
So I think that, so if you look at historically how pure play companies have been able to return value to shareholders, I think it's superior to this conglomerate thinking. And then the shareholders can obviously also sell off their shares if they want to, if they don't believe in the market any longer. But I think from a company perspective, then it's all about how to handle that downturn which you have in a volatile market. And that's what we are doing now, for instance, with building up some more time charter coverage, ensuring that we have a robust balance sheet, so that we can also and we also have a trading arm, which we can talk about later, which is making us more robust than the typical shipping company, boom and bust shipping company, has been able to. So I think it's for me quite evident that pure play shipping companies is what the shareholders favor in this world, at least.
What is the lessons of being now dual listed in Oslo and New York? Is the future US investors generally, is that a trend, it seems like, for some big companies, or is it good to have the combination?
I think there are two different investor bases, basically. So in the US, they are much more focused on revenue and yield, and while here in Norway, especially, it's still more focused on NAV and underlying values. I think it also depends probably where you are in the cycle. You know, right now we've been fortunate to in our market to return quite a lot of dividends to our shareholders, and that's typically something which attracts a lot of American shareholders. Norwegian investors historically have been probably buying more lower in the cycle and then selling also on the back of increased values and market sentiment in general. So I think we have about 50, if you look at the daily liquidity, we have about 50% of it in New York and 50% here in Oslo, which we are very happy about, by the way. If it's going to be more in the States in the future, could be, but we also have some very we have very good support in the Norwegian and European market as well. So we see that the understanding of the shipping industry in the Norwegian and the Scandinavian investor base is generally higher than in the States. In the States, they come in because of they come in from the energy angle typically. So they are investing in other companies in the energy space, and then they look at shipping as a proxy for that. And of course, then if you top up with a nice dividend yield, you get on the radar. So it's a different angle on let's say, from the various investor bases and how they find the company attractive.
But are you fearful of, too much regulations in the Nordics and EU and stuff like that makes you want to delist and just be New York, or is that over-exaggerated?
It's a lot of regulations and compliance regulations in the States too, I can assure you, with SOX compliance and so on. So I think now for us it's we'll manage that, and for us the most important thing is to be listed, and make sure that we create shareholder value on the back of that listing. And I think what we have seen is that we have increased liquidity. We could not have done the Avance deal, I think, without having that New York listing in place. So it's for us, and a vital part of our strategy, our capital market strategy.
Yeah. So I was at an event where someone who knew you well said you had been quite busy because you had a listing in New York, and it was just at the airport, just a casual conversation where they said that Kristian is very methodical. He reads every page before listing. He's not like a person who just like yeah, I'll trust you and just go ahead and list it and everything. Is that a fair sort of like a small story that summarizes that you like to be thorough, do things the right way, or is it an exaggeration that you have to read all the lines, all the papers?
Well, I like to be absolutely involved in what's going on, but you can't read everything, of course, and you have to trust. For me, I put a lot of trust in the team and the organization. But of course, I also need to be at a certain level of detail where it matters. So and of course, when you are in the midst of listing a company, for instance, there are lots of documents you have to read through. But
it's like a wedding almost. You have to have everything in plan.
Yes, exactly. But I'm not the only one. I mean, if you look at in a process like that, if you look at head of audit committee, the chairman as well, there's a lot of documents that you have to process to because you sign off, right, with your own name. So you want to make sure that it's accurate what actually is written in that document. So, but of course you can't read everything. That's impossible.
No, and maybe the thing is when you get to your level, you have to find the perfect balance of sort of trusting the person who is closer to the problem, while at the same time being in the problem enough to either ask the right question, give the right mandate, help out. So maybe that's always like a thing you have to balance. How involved versus, actually understanding the matter enough to contribute.
Yeah, that's right. And it's there is no kind of clear answer to this. And it depends very much on the people you have around you, how experienced they are, and so on. But I think I try to split my time into three, basically, during the week and also the year. It's 1/3 on the organization, and then 1/3 on the capital markets and the investors, and 1/3 on the commercial market, because I'm also head of commercial in BW LPG. And I think that gives me kind of also the understanding of what's going on in the market with investors and also in the organization. Because if you tilt your attention too much, one way or the other, someone will suffer at one point. So I try to split it into these three equal parts. It's not always easy, but at least during the quarter or the year, that's kind of how I think about spending my time. Which ones gives you the most fun? Most fun
of those three?
Yeah, actually all three of them. Because it's and they can be frustrating and fun, at an equal basis. But it's or equally fun and frustrating. But it's it depends a lot on of course what kind of issue or matter you're dealing with. So I would say it's equally spread out, I would say.
But do you feel like if you're going to be a very competent leader and not just a business person looking at deals, you actually have to, in some sense, care about people, wanting them to succeed, push them in order to actually be a good leader? That you sort of have to have that a bit innate in you?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, in my view at least. And I believe in teams, building up teams which are complementary, so that you can deal with long series of different matters and issues and opportunities. And then I also, and we talk a lot about this in the management team to how to recognize people, because the force of recognition that is very strong and powerful. So if people feel that they are seen and recognized, it's something which works as a glue in the organization in a way. And you build up a lot of trust and loyalty also internally in the organization by recognizing people. And this is not this is a team effort. Everything we do is a team effort. So of course there are always people you maybe forget to recognize, but at least we try to keep that in mind at the management team level, that we involve people, recognize them, and it makes it much more fun as well to work in an organization where you are recognized.
And maybe also a key part of that is sort of leading by example. So you mentioned the chairman already, all the things he does that also goes down in the organization to you. So it's also about if you're going to have a great culture, it sort of has in some sense to be set on the top, because it's very hard to execute a culture from the bottom up and then mid layer. It just like
that doesn't work. No, you have to lead by example, and that's obviously a challenge because no one is perfect. So, we coming back to my if you it's also about how much time you want to spend on it, right? If you don't want to spend time on it, it's impossible, but you need to spend at least a fair chunk of your time on the organization if you are to succeed with these things that we talk about now.
So obviously there's many young professionals tuning into these kind of conversations, wanting to create an interesting career. If you interview a young professional between 25 and 40 years old, what are sort of your favorite questions to ask? What do you look for? Is there anything you've seen over the years that you think, okay, this person has a great chance of actually having an impact versus this is probably not the right place? You said before that shipping is a lifestyle, not a job. It actually has quite many views on YouTube. So I think it sort of says that this is not your typical 8 to 4, get home, relax. It's sort of around the clock. But any favorite questions to ask, things to understand about people? And if this is an industry where you actually believe that they will have a great impact?
Yeah, I think it depends on where in the organization you recruit people, obviously. But I'll still stand behind that phrase. It's a lifestyle, not a job. To me, from my experience, the ones who have succeeded the best in the shipping industry, and that could be on the broking side, banker side, it could be from the lawyer side, and obviously by working in a shipping company, it's the ones who have a strong interest for the maritime industry to begin with, or they develop a strong interest for the maritime industry, so that they think it's interesting, fun, and love all the the various aspects of our industry, which is because shipping is a very simple industry surrounded by a lot of complexity, and the people who kind of start really enjoying that complexity and the exposure you have to the international markets, to geopolitics, to a lot of fun people, and tough competition in the markets and so on. They are the ones typically who survive and thrive in the shipping business. And the same goes for brokers, bankers, lawyers on the technical side. So I think people in general who have that strong interest or build that interest in the maritime industry, like yourself, I would say, they are the ones who actually stay in the industry for the entire career, because that's one of the remarkable things about the shipping industry is that lots of people stay in the business from when they start working until they retire. And I think that's quite unique. That says something about the attraction it also and the addiction you get by working in the shipping industry. And it's obviously not only fun and excitement. It's it's also it's a pretty tough industry to work in because it's very, very competitive, and you are exposed to the unforeseen all the time. So you have to have that certain resilience, which you, by being interested in the business, in the industry, would automatically have, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. So if you started over again, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of, okay, I want to acquire that skill, I want to be sailing a couple of years before I go into the office? Is there any like reflections on, or I want to dive into AI and see how I can optimize everything from A to Z? Or would you have done the same journey and just...
I think that's a very good question, actually. I think the AI is probably something which lies more ahead of us, but we are spending quite a lot of time on it. But we just need to find out how it's actually going to impact our business before we decide on which route to go. But I think it depends a little bit on where in the shipping industry you work. But one thing which is where I at least have built up kind of my strength in is because I worked as a shipbroker, so I have quite a lot of transaction experience, and I think that is something which is part of my strength. There are other parts where I'm not even close to an expert, where I need to rely on my colleagues. Typically, I'm not a financier or a banker as such. So I mean, that's where I typically need support but you learn as you go along. Which is very important part of life in general, I think, and also your professional life, is that it's not like you go out of school and then you know everything you need to know. Here it's a continuous learning process, and to me it's about over the last year it's been a lot about the capital markets, since I came from the private part of the industry, being a shipbroker. And of course, it's a slightly different animal when you have to deal with the capital markets and investors, which you don't really have in the same sense in the private part of the industry. So it's, but I learn new things every day. So it's, and there's always room for improvement. But I think it's very important when I had this kind of ambition to become, one of the best shipbrokers within that field. So to specialize and kind of excel within that fairly narrow space.
In gas or in...
Yeah, in gas, yes.
Yeah, so
because I started in the industry as an LPG shipbroker. I started as a trainee, and then when after I graduated from the Norwegian School of Economics, I started full-time as an LPG shipbroker. So I was quite fortunate, I would say, because it was a market which was growing and has kind of was the start of the journey where I am today. So I followed the industry for more than for 25 years basically, and but I think one important part of being successful is that you have to be good at something. If you're just a generalist, you can be easily substituted. So
you're outcompeted on across every.
And I think as a shipbroker, you feel that very, very quickly if you're not relevant. So you have to be very good at something to actually attract business and clients. So we talked a lot about that in the team. I remember when I started. Okay, we have to be individually good at something to be able to attract business, and I think that's still the case. So strong interest for the industry to focus on something which is relevant and to be really good at it is still something I would recommend young professionals to do.
Great advice. I remember asking Lars Barstad, CEO of Frontline, some question, and he said that when he sort of did his education, he didn't foresee, the law fees coming up and the lawyers and how crazy that will become. Maybe that's also a signal that maybe that has become a very, very big part of shipping. that wasn't as you couldn't expect it at that point.
Yeah, I mean, but you talked about regulations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the world is becoming more and more regulated, and compliance issues and what have you. So of course that usually one way or the other involves a lawyer, right? So it's I think it's the way the world has evolved. Yeah.
And it's probably time to deregulate it in some sense.
I think the trend, at least in the EU, seems to be going slightly, like you say, they're taking the foot off the accelerator, so to say, because they realize it's in a market which is overregulated, it's not competitive, and you limit growth.
Especially in EU, probably.
Exactly. So that's, I think, some sort of realization is appearing, it seems.
So time has gone so fast, Kristian. So just two quick questions left. So if you had to give, props to any shipping CEOs or companies outside of the BW group, which companies or CEOs has been impressive over the recent years?
Oh,
where you say, okay, that's great executed. I know there's so many companies, of course, in your system, but if you had to go
outside the BW system, I think there are numerous examples. So I think Lars Kristian Skarsgård in Bellships, he did a fantastic job, and we worked together in Furnace as well. So I remember very well when he said, "Sorry, but I have to hand in my resignation because I'm taking up the position as CEO in Bellships." And I think that journey was amazing. So hat off to Lars Kristian. Øystein Kalleklev has been a very enjoyable colleague and also counterpart to deal with. I think he's done great in returning value to the shareholders. And I think, of course, you can if you look at Lars-Christian Svensen has been also focusing a lot on the same important matters that I like to focus on too. So I mean, I think there are many names you can mention here. But I think what I think you can say is that over the last 10 years, I think the professionalism in shipping in general has improved a lot compared to the previous 10 years. And that's probably why I also have that long list of quite well-performing management teams and CEOs in the shipping space, because of course you get a bit of tailwind from the markets, but people have also learned a lesson from the previous 10 years. And this time it was all about returning value to the shareholders and making sure that you don't make the same mistakes as many people did in the previous upturn, right? So
good point.
Yeah.
So a last one, if you want to increase your knowledge, is there any books you should read, any newspapers, where should you source information? Do you have any recommendation to the audience that they should dive into and try to read?
I think, I enjoy reading The Economist as frequently as possible. I think, and one book which I think also you have mentioned is, The World for Sale. I think is an amazing story, which is good fun. It's a page turner. An older version of that is The King of Oil, which is about basically the rise of Mark Rich and Glencore and so on. It's also good fun reading. It's more tabloid maybe, but it's good fun. And then I also enjoy reading books like, which is more kind of from a political point of view. Why Nations Fail is another book I read recently, which I think was very interesting. So I think that combination, for me, it's a lot about the combination of industry and economics and markets, and reading as much as I can to understand what's going on. And also how the political landscape and how, let's say, the countries and the market evolve over time, which I find very interesting.
And maybe more than ever, we talked about India today. I mean, there's some geopolitical, decisions to be made by countries, and so that maybe is going to become even more relevant. I
think and in shipping, you're so exposed to the world outside you. So you really need to get a decent understanding of and broaden the horizon, and this understanding of what's going on out there in the world, because it shapes, your everyday life in such a big way.
Definitely. So Kristian, it's been fantastic to have you. I don't know, do you have any final reflections to shareholders listening, potential shareholders? Is just keep calm, invest in the story, or do you want to close with anything to summarize it?
I think like we tell all our investors, is that if you look at the underlying commodity story in the LPG space, it's great, and I think you can say that you can overbuild the shipping market and so on, but if you think in the longer term, that underlying commodity story in the LPG market is just phenomenal, and it will continue to be so in the future. It's a great commodity. It's also in a transition towards a lower, emission and environment perspective. So I think for me it's a great pleasure. I've worked in this industry since my graduation from university, and I think it's an amazing, industry to work in. So I'm a strong believer.
Perfect ending. Kristian, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure to host you.
Thank you.